Hello guys, you're welcome to today's tutorial video. If this is your first time here, thank you very much for stopping by, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you very much for sticking around. Thank you for supporting what I do. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing us how I made this beautiful gown. Okay, so I made it using African print, this particular African print that you can see in the video. And as you can see, this fabric has two different pattern. Okay, it has a pink striped pattern at the upper part, and the lower part is just plain white and black. So for me, I want to mix the lower pattern of the fabric, that's white and black. I want to mix it with the upper part at the sleeve region. Okay, so I want the white and black pattern to be at the hem of my sleeve. So because of that, I will not be cutting directly on my fabric. I'll be cutting on a paper, on my pattern paper, and then I will transfer it to my fabric. Okay, but if you are not going to be mixing your own fabric, just take your measurements directly on your fabric. So with that done, let's go right into our measurements. So I started my measurements by taking 1.5 inch for my starting line. Usually we'd use 0.5 inch for our starting line, but because this Ankara is going to have strings that will be used to achieve the ruched sleeve. Okay, so because of that, we are going to be using 1.5 as our starting line. So this 1.5 inch will form the casing where our strings, or you can call it tiny rope, where they will sit. Okay, so I'm just marking 1.5 all the way down, and I will connect my lines.
Okay, so I'm done working out my starting line. The next thing I'm going to be doing now is to mark my neckline measurement. Okay, so for the neckline, I'll be using a neck width of 3 inches. Okay, and I'll be using a neck depth of 1 inch for the back. Okay, 1 inch for the back and 2.5 inch for the front. Okay, 1 inch for the back. I'm just taking the same measurement here. 1 inch for the back and 2.5 inch for the front. So that's my lines. So I'm just connecting my neckline for to give it a good curve. Okay, right to the curve. Okay. So sorry, the pen is punching into the paper. I'll just go ahead and do as I say. Okay. So I'm just giving my neckline our usual neckline curve. Okay, so this is what I have, and this is for our back, and this is for our front.
So the next thing I'm going to do now is to take my measurements from my center back to the sleeve length. Okay, where you want your sleeve to stop. For me, I want the sleeve to stop after the elbow. Okay, I want it to go about 1 inch down the elbow. So from the center back to that region for me is 22 inches, and that is what I'll be marking right here. So from that 22 inch, I'm going to go down by 1.5 inch for my shoulder slope. Okay, so right where my sleeve is going to stop, you just go down by 1.5 inch or 1 inch depending on what you want to use for your shoulder slope, and then you connect from your neckline down to that point, as you see me do here. So from my shoulder slope, I'm going to be taking my round sleeve measurements, and I'm working with a round sleeve of 11 inches, and that includes my 1 inch seam allowance. So when I take my 1 inch seam allowance, I'll be left with 10 inches for the round sleeve. Okay, so I went ahead to take the round measurements for my clothes. Okay, and I'm working with a hip size of 44. 44 divided by 4 is 11, and to 11 I added 5 inches. Okay, that 5 inches also includes my seam allowance. So at the end of the day, I'm marking out 16 inches now on my fabric, but at the end of the day I'll be left with 15 inches. I hope you understand that. So my hip divided by 4 plus 5 is what I am marking right here. Okay, and that is 16 inches. The next thing I did is to connect from the 16 inches where my body round measurement is going to stop to the 11 inches for my round sleeve. Okay, then I went in by 1 inches at that point that you can see there, and I connected my sleeve to it to form my sleeve slope. Okay, because you don't want the hem of our sleeve to just be, you know, a perfect square, so I gave it a sleeve slope. So the next thing I did was to take my vertical measurements, because I gave this gown a little shaping. Okay, usually bubbles, usually you don't add shapes to bubble, but for this I decided to just give it a little shaping. Okay, so I marked out my waistline measurement of 18 inches and then the hip line of 25 inches, and that is what I am just rolling here. I apologize that the camera is not covering it, but just mark your waistline and your hip line. So what I did afterwards is to go in on my waistline. I went in by 1.5 inch. Okay, don't forget that the measurement that we have around our armhole region is 16 inches, but at the waistline I took out 1.5 inch, so I marked 14 inches on the waistline, and at the hip line I marked back my original 16 inches. I hope you understand. So at the armhole region we have 16 inches, at the waist region I have 14.5 inches, and at the hip line I have 16 inches. So I took that 16 inches that is on the hip line straight down, all the way down. So afterwards I connected my lines together for using my pattern master, as you can see me do. So I'm connecting from the 16 inches at my armhole to the 14.5 that I have on my waistline back to the 16 inches on my hip line, and then from the hip line I took it straight down. So at the hem of my gown I also have 16 inches, so it is straight down from that point. So I'm just going in to blend all the sharp edges, okay, so that, you know, those corners are not sharp. And afterwards I'm also going to be giving my armhole region a curve. Okay, I'm going to be giving it a good curve so that it is also not sharp. So the next thing I'm going to be doing now is to mark out the parts of my sleeve that I'll be cutting out. So I'm just going to be marking out 16 inches from my center front, okay, down to my sleeve region. So I'm just taking out 16 inches and I would connect the line. Okay, so whatever I have left from that 16 inches to the hem of my sleeve is what I will be cutting out on my lower pattern. So at first I was marking out 16 and a half, okay, but then I later changed it to 16 inches. Okay, and like I said, if you are not going to be mixing your own fabric pattern, then you don't need all this step, you can just skip it. So the reason why I actually, you know, decide to mark out on a pattern paper first is so that we can retain all of these slopes. Okay, because if we decide to cut it, you know, cut the other part of the sleeve on our fabric, we might not be able to maintain that perfect slope, but this way we are going to get the perfect slope. Now that we are done with all our markings, the next thing to do is to add our shoulder seam allowance. Okay, don't forget that we're going to be adding back our 1.5 inch, and we are going to be following our shoulder slope line. Okay, so I just marked out 1.5 inch following my shoulder slope, and I connected the lines. And once we are done with that, we are done with the first stage of our pattern drafting, and then we can cut out our pattern on paper and transfer it to our fabric. Okay guys, so I have my fabric folded on the table now, and as you can see I have 16.5 inches of fabric on fold. Don't forget that our pattern paper, the widest measurement that we have there is 16 inches. So the 0.5 inch that I have here is to join the sleeve that we cut off. Okay, that little piece that we cut off at the other part, we need to join it back to this fabric. So the 0.5 inch is the same allowance. I hope you understand that. So I'll be placing my paper on it now, and I'm going to trace out all my measurements starting from the back piece. So I have it folded into four in the normal way right here on the table. So I'll start by cutting out my back neckline first. Okay, and then once we are done cutting the back neckline, I'll separate the back from the front, and then I'll cut the front neckline. So my pattern paper is not as long as the full length for my fabric, so I have gone ahead to extend it to my desired length. Okay, and I'm just I'm just cutting out my fabric following the shape on my pattern paper. So you can see that I stopped my cutting at that sleeve region where we are going to be joining. Okay, so by the time we join this to the other half of the sleeve, it is going to align. So I left out the 0.5 inch for joining. Okay, so at this point I am just going to separate the back piece from the front piece. Okay, and then we can focus on the front piece. So I'm just opening up my fabric, and I am taking out either of the two of them for the back and the front piece. So now it's time to cut out our front piece, and that is what I am just doing now. So I'm just going in with my scissors, and I'm cutting out the neckline for the front piece. So the only thing that differentiates the back piece from the front piece is our neckline. Next is to give our front neckline the V shape opening. Okay, the front neckline is not a round neckline, it has a slit at the front. So I'm going to be going down by 4 inches for the slit at the front. Don't forget that we already came down by 2.5, so the 2.5 plus the 4 inches now will give me 6.5. So that means I'm using a total depth of 6.5. By the time we seam that with about 0.5 inch, it means that we'll be having a 7-inch neckline opening. So just calculate the opening that will not reveal the upper chest of your client. Okay, and then work with that. So for me, I am working with 4 inches. Our neck piece looks like. Okay, this is what the front of our neckline looks like. Now we're going to be cutting interfacing for this part, because there will be a collar around this part, so we don't need to interface the round neckline. We only need it for this V part. Okay, so we're going to be cutting interfacing for this now. Okay, so to cut facing for your clothes, you're just going to take a sizable amount of fabric, and then you're going to fold it like so. Or you're going to take your fabric and just place it like so, and then you cut the neckline. Make sure not to cut your original neckline. Okay, just make sure it is only the interfacing you are cutting on. Okay, and then you place your right side facing right side. Okay, right side facing right side like this, and then you stitch. Okay, you stitch, and then you notch, you give it a notch, and then you turn it over and press down. So we are done with this part. The next thing I'm going to be doing now is to cut out the part of our sleeve that we cut off earlier. Okay, so I'm going to be placing my pattern paper on my fabric, and I have folded my fabric in such a way that I have one side opened and I have the other closed. Okay, so this closed part will be where the hem of the sleeve will be, so we will not need to hem that sleeve. Okay, so I'm just going to be placing it on it now, and I will cut. So before cutting, I'm going in with my tape rule to mark out 0.5-inch seam allowance, okay, on the side that I'm going to be joining with my main fabric. So I'm just marking my 0.5 seam allowance all round. Don't forget that we already left 0.5-inch allowance on our main fabric too, so we are going to be seaming on that allowance.
So I'm just going to cut it now, following the slanted measurement. Okay, I will not cut it straight. So I've done that. Then I'll just cut across the lines that I have marked. So like I said, it's not a straight line, so just make sure that. So this is what I have for the first part. So I'm just going to be bringing our fabric and show us how I'm going to join it.
So this is how we are going to be joining the sleeve to our main fabric. Okay, we are going to be joining the open end to our fabric, as you can see, and then you can see that the other side is, we have already flipped it over, we have turned it over, so we don't need to hem the edge of the sleeve. As you can see, we don't need to hem it because we have already flipped it over. Okay, so I'm going to be cutting 4 pieces for this. This is just one piece on the right side. This is just one piece for the front, so I'm also going to be cutting another one for the left side of the front, and then I'm going to be cutting for the 2 sides of the back. So in total I'm going to be cutting 4 pieces of this part of this pattern that I have here. Okay guys, so like I said, I have gone ahead, okay, I've gone ahead to cut 2 pieces each for the left side of the sleeve and 2 pieces each for the back side of the sleeve. And as you can see that they are doubled, okay, because we don't want our sleeve flying out this way in a single form. So we have folded it over, and this folded part will be the one that will be at the hem of, okay, it will be the one to be joined like so, and then it will be at the hem of our sleeve. I hope we get that. Okay guys, so I've gone ahead to sew down the interfacing on my neckline. Okay, I've gone to sew down the interfacing on my neckline, and this is what it looks like. Okay, I've also gone ahead to give it a very good notch. Okay, so when the light comes, I'm going to give this a very good press. Okay, I'm going to give this a very good press when the light comes. Okay, I've also gone ahead to add the sleeve extension, okay, to my sleeve on both sides. Okay, I've had the sleeve extension to my sleeve for both the front and the back. Next thing I'm going to be doing now is to place the right sides of our fabrics to each other and join it by the shoulder line. Okay, place the right sides of my fabric to each other and join it by the shoulder. So I'll join the shoulders using the 1.5-inch seam allowance that we left at the beginning. Okay, so I am done cutting out my strips. Okay, and this is what I have 4 of them in total right here. Okay, so like I said, I'm just going to be putting them, so I'm just going to put it like so at the, I'm going to seam this down first. Okay, after seaming it down, okay, then I would put them in and then I will stitch on them like I said earlier. Okay, although you can also decide to put this in here and just seam beside it, but to do this you have to be very careful to be sure that you don't sew on your string, because the moment you sew on your string, then you will not be able to pull. Okay, so whichever method works best for you, you just go ahead with that. Okay, so I'm going to be joining that now and I'll come back to show us the results. Okay guys, so right now I am done sewing my drawstring to the shoulder line. Okay, so this is what I have, this is what it looks like on the other side. Okay, so if I pull this, you can see, okay, you can see the effects. When I pull it, you can see the ruch it's giving, and you can see that it is stopping at this part where I double stitched. Okay,
So if you want yours to go all the way up to the shoulder, you can do that if you want it to move up. So when you ruch your drawstring, it's going to stop at the part where you double stitched on. Okay, and I have also done the same thing for the other side. This is what the other side looks like, and I am yet to iron it out. Okay, so this is what the other side also looks like. Okay,
so the next thing is to fix our pocket, and once again I want to apologize that the video did not capture when I was cutting out the pocket. I think I lost that part of the video because of space issue. Okay, so but what I used for my pocket here, I have 10 inches by 12 inches, so the width is 10 inches and the length is 12 inches. Now at the end of the day, after taking in your seam allowance on both sides of 0.5, you'll be left with 9 inch by 11 inch. So the final size of our pocket is 9 inch by 11 inch. So I placed my pocket 16.5 inches away from the shoulder line, as you can see me setting it here. Okay, so I measured 16.5 inches away from my shoulder, and that is where I placed my pocket. And away from the waistline, I measured 3 inches inward from the waistline, and I placed my pocket there. So 16.5 inches away from the shoulder line and 3 inches away from the waistline, and that is where I placed my pocket on both sides. Now for you to actually determine the vertical position to place your pocket, I mean where I marked my own 16.5 inches. Now it depends on where your pattern stops. Okay, if you try to put your pocket very far away from where the pattern is, it might not come out really well. Okay, because I tried it and it wasn't giving me what I want, except the pocket will be sitting all the way down around the hem of your gown, then that is another style entirely on its own. Okay, but if you want the pocket to be, you know, around the waist region, then you have to place it quite close to the upper pattern. Okay, so that way it looks beautiful. I hope you get what I am trying to say. Okay, so another thing I did is to lining my pockets. Okay, because we don't want the pocket to be very light. Okay, we want to give it body and strength. So because of that, I went ahead to lining my pocket, and I used that lining to turn the upper part of my pocket. Okay, I did not turn the two sides of my pocket and the lower part because they will be covered by my organza ruffles, but for the upper part I went ahead to turn it with the lining. I top stitched and then I ironed it down. Okay, so for my organza I used 5 inches. Okay, and after folding into two, I'm left with 2.5 inches. Now I used 5 inches because I did not turn my organza inwards. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. I sewed on the outside of my organza, so the outside part is rough. Okay, so if you want to make your own organza neat, maybe you want to turn it over, that means that you'll be using 6 inches, so that at the end of the day you will still be left with 2.5 inches. But for me, I used 5 inches, and then after folding I have 2.5 inches. So I went ahead to run a loose stitch on my organza using my sewing machine, okay, to form gathers. Okay, so you're just going to pull your gathers together and then it will form your ruffles. Now there are two ways to add this pocket, your ruffles and pockets, to your gown, and I'm going to be showing us the two methods that I used. Okay, and I'll be telling us which method is the easiest. Okay, so the first method is to pleat your ruffles under your pocket as you are sewing. Okay, so as you take your clothes and your pockets to the machine, and then you pleat as you sew. You sew as you pleat under your pocket. So this method is quite tedious and stressful because you have to, you know, you are trying to pleat and sew at the same time, and you're also trying to ensure that your pocket remains aligned. Okay, that your pocket remains at the right position, so it is quite tedious. So I advise you to opt for the second method that I will be showing now.
and do that for
So
both the
also
right
this is
and
why
the
we are
left
yet
side.
to
Then I'll come
join
back to
our
show
gown
us
at the
what
sides,
I
okay,
have.
so that it will be easy for us to sew our pockets. Or you can decide to first of all sew your ruffles on your pocket, as you see in this other one that I also made. Okay, you can decide to sew your ruffles on your pocket like this, so this makes it very easy to just attach to your gown. I hope you understand. So this other one, this one that you can see right here, is the best method. You sew your ruffles first of all in your pocket, and then you take your pocket to your gown, you just pin it down, and then you run your machine on it. I'm done fixing the pockets of my clothes, 2 pockets, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so I've also gone down to hem down my neckline. Okay, so you can see it's looking very perfect. So the next thing and the final thing that I'm going to do right now is to close my neckline. Okay, so I'll be using a bias strip. I've gotten a black bias strip that I'll be using to close this neckline. So once I am done closing the neckline, I'll go ahead and close the sides of my dress using the 1-inch seam allowance that I left at the beginning. Okay, I'm also going to go ahead to hem the lower parts of my dress. Okay, so just to fix my bias, I'll be fixing my bias outside so that it shows like this. Okay, as I want it to show outside like this. Okay, because my fabric actually has black stripes, so I actually want my bias to come out this way. Okay, so to achieve that, I'm just going to start by seaming the first half of my bias like so. So I'll seam the first half like this, as if I'm sewing outside. Okay, so I'm sewing outside and I'll take it round. So after that, I'll just take it and turn it over. Okay, I hope you got that. So this is what my neckline looks like at the end of the day. I couldn't snap before I packed it. Okay, and this is how it is going to our beautiful client, and this is me wearing another sample of this same dress. Okay, if you have enjoyed this video, please like this video, subscribe to this channel for more, so that you'll be notified every time I post tutorials.